Started. Good afternoon. This is Transportation Committee Chair Deb Barber. It is Monday, April 11th, 2022. Before I call the meeting to order, I would like to say a few things about how we will conduct this meeting. I want to acknowledge that COVID-19 is causing us to alter our usual procedures. Due to the ongoing pandemic, Council Chair Zelli has determined that it's not reasonable or prudent to conduct in-person meetings at this time. Accordingly, Met Council members will participate in this meeting by phone or other electronic means, and this Transportation Committee meeting will be conducted under Minnesota Statute Section 13D.021. Because we are conducting the meeting electronically, all votes must be taken by roll call. Before we start the meeting, we need to establish whether there is a quorum. And with that, Jenna, could you call the roll, please?
Chambliss.
Here.
Cummings.
Here.
Fredson.
Here.
Gonzalez.
Here.
Pacheco. Sterner.
Present.
Zirin.
Present.
And Barber.
Here. And with that, I'll call to order the meeting for the Metropolitan Council Transportation Committee for April 11th, 2022. The first order of business is approval of the agenda. If there are no changes or additions to the agenda, we can move ahead. Did anyone have any changes? All right, seeing and hearing none, we can move on to approval of the minutes from the March 28th, 2022 meeting. Did anyone have changes or additions to those minutes? Seeing and hearing none, I'd entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved by Gonzalez.
Moved by Gonzalez. Is there a second?
Second by Sterner.
Seconded by Sterner. Is there any other discussion? Seeing and hearing none, Jenna, could you call the roll, please?
Chambliss.
Aye.
Cummings.
Aye.
Fredson.
Aye.
Gonzalez.
Aye.
Pacheco. Sterner.
Aye.
Zirin.
Aye.
And Barber.
Aye. With that, the minutes are approved. And we are on to reports. So tonight for our MTS Services Director report, we actually have Jerry Sutton here to present.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, committee members. From MTS Planning, we have a few items to mention regarding grants. First, the regional solicitation applications for this round of funding are due Thursday, April 14th. The Transportation Advisory Board will select projects for funding in late 2022. Second, members of the House of Representatives need to submit requests for federal congressional community project funding, previously called earmarks, by April 29th. Council members may be contacted for letters of support for these requests. In addition, council members may get letter of support requests from local agencies submitting for the federal infra, mega, and rural competitive grants, and all three of these grant applications are due May 23rd. Please send all requests that you receive to Steve Peterson, MTS Manager, so that the council can coordinate and track requests and responses. From MTS Finance, funding authorized under the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law enacted as the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act was apportioned last week. The fiscal year 2022 federal apportionment is $116 million, and that's a 33% increase from our 2021 funding, which was $87 million. And finally, contracted services. Metro Mobility is planning service changes that will align the service area and hours to fixed route service availability for ADA compliance purposes. Christine Kennan, Senior Manager for Metro Mobility, will present more detail about where those changes will occur and the customer impact at the full council meeting on Wednesday. And that concludes my report, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Jerry. Are there any questions or comments from council members? All right, seeing and hearing none, we'll move on to General Manager Questra from Metro Transit.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. I just have a few brief updates today. Thankfully, COVID cases remain low across the region. The cases among Metro Transit employees also continue to remain quite low, but we continue to track the cases for the purpose of contract tracing and as the new variant progresses. On that note, the federal mask requirement for public transportation is currently set to expire on April 18th. We don't know at this time if it will be extended So we are monitoring that decision as well. Metro Transit continues to see a modest growth in ridership. Right now, we're about 53% of pre-pandemic ridership system-wide. To put this in a national context, we're hearing from the American Public Transportation Association, APTA, that nationwide transit ridership is closer to 60% of pre-pandemic levels, but keep in mind that this average includes some major cities that have fewer options for travel other than transit. All in all, it can be said that we have a long way to go to build ridership, and I think one way to do that is to begin returning services. We continue to face significant challenges with operator hirings, and this has required us to reduce rather than increase services as we had planned. We're also facing significant workforce hiring challenges as this is also occurring in Metro Transit Police Department, where police officers and CSOs hiring have been far more difficult than we had hoped. Like other transit agencies across the nation, workforce hiring is probably one of our greatest challenges, if not our greatest challenge. So with that, I'm available for questions.
Thank you, Wes. Are there questions or comments from council members? Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Wes, I'm wondering, I know that, you know, for some time now there's been a driver shortage for all of the various types of providers, schools and so forth. How do we compare now with our competitors who are, I mean, it's one hiring pool, and I'm just wondering how our pay and benefits compare with others who are also trying to hire at this time?
I think we have favorable pay and benefit packages with other bus operators, but I'm not sure that that's our true competition, because there's so much hiring going on among workforces for such companies as Amazon and Fed Express and so forth. And we're hearing that truckers are getting wage increases that are unprecedented as well. So it's hard to pin down, you know, among other transit operators, we're probably okay, but that may not be our true competition in hiring.
Thank you for that. I hadn't thought about that. Thank you.
All right, any additional questions or comments? All right, thank you, Wes. Our next item was going to be a report from TAAC. Unfortunately, David Finley couldn't join us today, so he's going to report at the next meeting. So we can look forward to having just both a TAB and a TAAC report at the next meeting. Now we're on to our consent agenda. We have 4 items on consent tonight, and I would entertain a motion to approve the items on consent. Someone want to make a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Okay. Moved by Councilmember Sterner, seconded by Councilmember Cummings. Is there any other discussion? Seeing and hearing none. Jenna, would you call the roll, please?
Chambliss,
Aye.
Cummings,
Aye.
Fredson,
Aye.
Gonzalez,
Aye.
Pacheco,
Aye.
Sterner,
Aye.
Zirin,
Aye.
and Barber.
Aye. With that, the consent agenda is passed. Moving on to non-consent business, our first item is 2022-77, which is the Metro D-Line Station Plan Amendment number 1, and we have Adam Smith here to present.
And Chair Barber and council members, before Adam presents the next 2 business items, if I may provide a brief update.
Absolutely.
Thank you. I wanted to just mention briefly an update on the D-Line project changes being discussed tonight, and specifically what's not part of tonight's requested action. So as you may recall, in the past, we've communicated with you about 3 locations where D-Line stations will be modified in response to coordination with other ongoing efforts. And tonight's amendment to the D-Line station plan will deal with 2 of those locations, with the 3rd being Chicago and 38th Street. So as you may be aware, Metro Transit bus routes 5 and 23 remain on detour around the intersection where George Floyd was killed in 2020, and memorials are in place. The city of Minneapolis will soon be launching planning and engagement around the future reconstruction of this intersection, and will be coordinating very closely with that effort to advance plans for a permanent D-Line station. Any changes to the approved plan for the D-Line would be brought before the council in coordination with that future city-led process. In the meantime, however, we of course are readying our plans to have temporary stations in place for when the D line opens later this year in December. I do want to share that those stations will be located on Park and Portland Avenues at 38th Street, where Route 5 buses are currently running on Detour. And these temporary stations, very similar to what was deployed on Olson Highway for the C line, those will ensure that basic BRT features like shelter, a safe boarding location, and fare payment machines are in place when D line service begins. We do anticipate that these temporary stations will be used for the next few years until intersection construction is complete, and our permanent D line stations would be completed at that time as well. We're currently working with Hennepin County and the City of Minneapolis to finalize the details for these temporary stations, and we'll be starting outreach in the area in the coming weeks around these temporary stations. So thank you for the chance to just provide this brief update. I'll pause for any questions and otherwise hand things over to Adam for tonight's business.
Thank you, Katie. Questions? Councilmember Chambliss.
Yes, for the temporary stations, after the 3 years are up and the construction is completed, what is going to happen to the temporary stations? Will they be replaced by buses, or will the stations be removed? What is the plan for that?
Chair Barber, Councilmember Chambliss, great question. That's some of the details that we'll be continuing to work with both Hennepin County, as Park and Portland are their streets, as well as the City of Minneapolis as we coordinate with that future intersection reconstruction. We do anticipate, in principle, that we would be returning things to the pre-stop state at the time when those are no longer in use.
All right. Any additional questions for Katie? All right. Thank you for that update. I appreciate it. Now we turn it over to Adam.
Okay. Thank you, Chair Barber. I'm Adam Smith. I'm Environmental Compliance Lead with the Arterial BRT Group. So as Katie noted, I'll be making two brief presentations today describing amendments to the D-Line Station Plan and B-Line Corridor Plan. So today's presentations really focus on administrative changes to these plans that are being advanced in parallel by processes led by a number of our agency partners along these corridors. So first I'll be discussing the proposed changes for the D-Line Station Plan. Slide, please. So Chair Barber and committee members, item 2022-77 requests that the council approve amendment 1 to the D-Line Station Plan to add a new station at Osseo and 47th Avenue and update the location for a permanent southbound platform at Portland and 77th Street. Slide, please. To provide a little background, in July 2018, the council approved the D-Line Station Plan, establishing the number and location of stations for the D-Line. In early 2019, the council approved an addendum to the plan confirming the location of the Chicago and 48th Street station. Since that time, design has been completed and construction has begun for the start of revenue service planned for December of this year. And the green dots on the map that you can see here indicate where major construction activities have been completed along the corridor. In 2023, two major projects will begin construction along the corridor, prompting the changes addressed by this plan amendment. Each of these projects will require transit detours, which will be coordinated with roadway agencies and communicated to riders as more details are developed. Next slide, please. Based on coordination with the agencies leading these projects, staff are recommending the addition of a D-Line station at Osseo Road and 47th Avenue in coordination with a planned Hennepin County reconstruction project. And at Portland and 77th Street, staff are making a recommendation to shift the permanent southbound D-Line platform to the southwest intersection quadrant in coordination with MnDOT's planned Portland Avenue and I-494 interchange project. Next slide, please. So first, in the Osseo and 47th Avenue area, this station was not included in the originally approved D-Line station plan due in part to a lack of pedestrian infrastructure in this part of the corridor, along with a number of space constraints at this particular intersection. However, public feedback has indicated support for an additional station. In comments on the draft D-Line station plan, the City of Minneapolis also commented that Metro Transit should look for future opportunities to include a station in this segment. And public feedback specific to transit in this area was focused on station spacing, with commenters feeling that previously planned stations were spread too far apart. So we had a support for adding a BRT station in this segment as well. So the county's programmed reconstruction project was really identified as an opportunity to add a station in this area, as it would be addressing some of those previous concerns that led to a station not being proposed in the original station plan. So I'll note that the county reconstruction project is scheduled to begin construction in 2023, and that station at this location would also serve the C line in this segment. Next slide, please. So here you can see the project layout with the portion that includes the proposed BRT station. The project layout was approved by the Minneapolis City Council in February of 2021. In the lead up to layout approval, the county completed significant public engagement work, including plans for a BRT station within the project limits. Following Metropolitan Council action, final station design and construction will continue to be coordinated with the county's project, which again is scheduled to begin construction next year in 2023. Next slide, please. Turning to Portland and 77th Street, the approved D-Line station plan identified platforms in the northwestern and northeastern intersection quadrants of this location. Following plan approval, coordination took place with MnDOT around design for the I-494 project, which includes changes to Portland Avenue in this area as well. In considering MnDOT's design, stakeholders identified that a configuration placing the southbound platform in the southwest quadrant would be preferable from what was included in the approved plan. Metro Transit will be constructing temporary stations in the northern intersection quadrants to provide passenger waiting facilities for D-Line opening day. And MnDOT's project is scheduled to begin construction in 2023, with permanent platforms being constructed in the future as part of that larger project. Next slide, please. So this slide shows a comparison of the platform location or configuration that was included in the approved station plan on the left, including a southbound platform in the northwest quadrant, and then you can see the amended configuration, which would shift the southbound platform to the southwest quadrant. Here again, MnDOT has led community and stakeholder engagement around the 494 project, including for this location. Additionally, the city of Richfield voted to provide municipal consent for this layout in February of this year. And as part of this process for municipal consent, received comments and held a public hearing on the proposed layout. Next slide, please. So to conclude with this item, staff requests that the council approve Amendment 1 to the D-Line station plan to add a new station at Osseo and 47th Avenue and to update the location for a permanent southbound platform at Portland and 77th Street. And with that, Chair, I'll take questions.
Okay, good. Thank you, Adam. Are there questions or comments from council members? All right, seeing, Councilmember Chambliss.
So I see that this does not add funds, and unless I missed something, does that mean that the extra station is part of the planned contingency?
Ask Katie to chime in here.
Katie, go ahead.
Madam Chair and Councilmember Chambliss, great question. In the case of the Portland and 77th Street station, that would be the station as planned. We would not be spending significant project funds on the temporary station, so that permanent outlay would be included in that baseline budget. And to the question around Osseo and 47th Avenue, that additional station, that is something that we do have capacity for within the project contingency and can deliver.
Thank you.
Thank you. Additional questions or comments? All right, seeing and hearing none, I entertain a motion to approve business item 2022-77.
I'll make a motion to approve that.
It's moved by Councilmember Chambliss. Is there a second?
Cummings seconds.
Seconded by Councilmember Cummings. And is there any other discussion? All right, seeing and hearing none. Jenna, could you call the roll, please?
Chambliss,
Aye.
Cummings,
Aye.
Fredson,
Aye.
Gonzalez,
Aye.
Pacheco,
Aye.
Sterner,
Aye.
Zirin,
Aye.
and Barber.
Okay, with that, the motion carries. Next, we're on to business item 2022-78, which is the Metro Beeline Corridor Plan Amendment number 1, and I'm going to turn it back over to Adam.
Thank you, Chair Barber. Now I will be introducing the Metro Beeline Corridor Plan Amendment number 1. Next slide, please. So Chair Barber and committee members, item 2022-78 requests that the council approve Amendment 1 to the Beeline Corridor Plan to update platform locations at 3 planned Beeline stations, Lake and Lyndale, Lake and Bloomington, and Lake and Cedar. Next slide, please. In October 2021, the council approved the Beeline Corridor Plan, establishing the number and locations of stations. At that time, you may recall that there were some remaining questions around these 3 station locations as staff continued coordination with Hennepin County and City of Minneapolis staff regarding potential broader Lake Street improvements. However, at that time, it was critical to advance design at other station locations as multi-agency staff coalesced around a recommended concept for the corridor. As of January, a recommended concept was identified for these broader improvements, setting the stage for the amendment brought forward for discussion today. As these changes are folded into the broader design for the project, we will look to complete the engineering phase for the Beeline later this year in advance of an early 2023 start to construction. Next slide, please. The recommended concept for improvements on Lake Street was really focused on the primary goals of improving transit speed and reliability, reducing crashes on a high injury street, and addressing pedestrian safety needs. The general approach includes restriping much of Lake Street within Minneapolis to replace 4-lane undivided sections with a 3-lane section plus a bus lane in the westbound direction. Bus lanes are also recommended in both directions in one-way segments of Lake Street and Lagoon Avenue, and some of the existing 5-lane segments of Lake Street. The concept results in bus lanes on about 50% of Lake Street, along with left turn lanes for safer traffic operations across this corridor. You may recall again from corridor plan engagement, we heard strong interest in bus priority treatments along this corridor to reduce travel times and meet the speed and reliability goals consistent with the broader arterial BRT program. Next slide, please. So to facilitate these broader changes, Beeline stations at the Lyndale, Bloomington, and Cedar Avenue station locations need to shift from what was included in the approved corridor plan. The approved corridor plan included platforms in the southwest and northeast corners of these intersections. This amendment shifts the platforms to the southeast and northwest corners at each intersection. The example shown on this slide shows the intersection of Lake and Lyndale, but the approved and now supposed to be amended platform location configurations are the same for the Bloomington and Cedar Avenue intersections. I'll note that the platform locations at these locations have been particularly fluid in working with our partners. Our initial draft corridor plan included far side platforms similar to the amended configuration you see here on the right. Within the existing 4-lane undivided segments on Lake Street, these are the intersections that feature some of the greatest constraints in terms of traffic volumes, turning movements, and the volume of pedestrian crossings. So as a result, these three intersections have really required additional coordination with our county and city partners. And now far platforms, as proposed as part of this amendment, will help to accommodate these larger volumes and turning movements, allowing safe transitions for buses to move through the intersections without stopping in a single lane of traffic. Next slide, please. In addition to feedback heard during the Beeline Corridor Plan engagement process, recommended concept for Lake Street also builds on substantial engagement efforts led by Hennepin County and the City of Minneapolis through various initiatives over the last several years, including Vision Zero planning, climate action planning, the city's transportation action plan, and complete streets policies. Hennepin County has led engagement around these broader Lake Street changes, including targeted stakeholder outreach to neighborhood organizations, as well as briefings to city council members and county commissioners. In addition to supporting these efforts, Metro Transit has also targeted additional outreach to station neighbors at these three intersections. Next slide, please. So to conclude, with this item, staff requests that the council approve amendment number 1 to the Beeline Corridor Plan to update platform locations at 3 planned Beeline stations, Lake and Lyndale, Lake and Bloomington, and Lake and Cedar. And with that, I will answer questions.
So thank you. Are there any questions or comments from council members? All right, seeing and hearing none, then I'd entertain a motion to approve business item 2022-78.
Fredson will move approval.
Moved by Fredson. Is there a second?
Second by Sterner.
Seconded by Sterner. Is there any other discussion? Seeing and hearing none, Jenna, could you call the roll, please?
Chambliss,
Aye.
Cummings,
Aye.
Fredson,
Aye.
Gonzalez,
Aye.
Pacheco,
Aye.
Sterner,
Aye.
Zirin,
Aye.
and Barber.
Aye. And with that, the motion passed. Thank you so much, Adam and Katie. Now we're on to business item 2022-87, which is the Metro Green Line Extension Master Contract 2 for Bass Lake Spur Freight Rail Maintenance and Repair. And we have Nat Gorham here to present. Oh, you're on mute.
Right. There we go. Thank you, Chair Barber and members of the committee. My name is Nat Gorham. I am the Manager of Contracts and Risks for Southwest LRT. Jim Alexander is currently on a much needed vacation, so I'm sure he wishes he could be here. But unfortunately for him, but fortunately for us, he's back tomorrow. So I'm here to present business item 2022-87, proposed action to reject bids for the master contract for Bass Lake Spur Freight Rail Maintenance and Repair. The Bass Lake Spur is about 7 miles long. It's a Class 2 freight rail line located in Minnetonka, Hopkins, and St. Louis Park. And as you probably know, the council owns this piece of property, and as a byproduct, we have the responsibility to inspect, maintain, and repair any deficiencies along the line. The contract was planned to procure these services with a freight rail maintenance provider. 2 bids were received on February 1st, 2022. The low bid was approximately $2.9 million, but was determined to be non-responsive. And the second and only other bid was for $4.5 million, which was responsive, but was considerably over our cost estimate. And so this part of rejecting this bid is to go out and procure a new contract of similar scope. Council plans to reformat the procurement in the hopes of getting more bids that are lower and more responsive. So we're currently in the process of developing that IFB and hope to get that out in the next few weeks. I will say, it's council's responsibility to make sure that this line is safe and operational. So there is currently an existing contract with a freight rail maintenance provider to perform these inspections and maintenance and repair work along this alignment. It's due to expire. So this new contract would piggyback that existing contract and to maintain continuity of service along that alignment. So that's all I'm here today to discuss. I welcome any questions, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Nat. Are there any questions? Councilmember Sterner.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just was wondering, can you share a little bit more why the first bid was unresponsive or not responsive, as you would say?
Yeah, Councilmember Sterner, Chair Barber, members of the committee. I'm not totally sure how much is public at this time. I know that it goes through a rigorous examination of many aspects. And there's many parts to it, and so I think maybe once it becomes public, that information will be available. But I'm not quite sure how much of it is. Maybe I would defer to procurement staff if Jody Jacoby is here.
Jody is on the line.
I don't want to say too much.
Mr. Chair, committee members, Jody Jacoby, Director of Procurement, and Nat's correct. At this time, what is public during this meeting is the name of the bidders and the bid amount. But what I can tell you that it was really clear the low bid, what did not pass some of the DBE requirements. So as a result, that was rejected. And so the only bid that we had remaining was above the estimate for the project. And so that's the action that we have before you, is to reject all bids and go back out to the market with some revised specifications.
Yeah, thank you, Jody.
All right, thank you.
All right, Councilmember Gonzalez.
Yeah, and just to follow up on that line of question, and because I was just also wondering what non-responsive means. So not necessarily in this case, but can you give us just some examples of what will constitute non-responsive, just for me to get an idea of what we're talking about?
Yes, Chair Barber, committee member Gonzalez. Responsive is a very straight determination where the bidder didn't meet one of the specific requirements set forth in our bidding documents. Some common examples are possibly they didn't meet the DBE or MCUB commitment or the good faith effort. Some other examples are they didn't submit a bid security or provide some of the documentation. And with a bid, we don't have the opportunity to go back and ask questions. We have a clearly set of specifications, and we expect the bidders to submit that. And then when the public bid opening, all we have are to look at all of that documentation and determine who is the low bidder based on their responsibility that they can do the work, but their responsiveness that they've submitted all the requirements that were set forth in the bidding documents.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
And I would just add part of the non-responsiveness finding is making sure everyone has their documents correct and creating a fair playing field across contractors, across bidders, so that no one's getting more time, that everyone's documents are in order, and that's a pretty standard practice within procurement, is to make sure every document's signed, every form is complete, and everyone's got a full package for evaluation.
And thank you. I think I saw Councilmember Cummings raise her hand too.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm curious, when you go out for new bids, how much can you tweak something like this to get a very dramatically different? It sounds like this was a really high and way beyond what was anticipated. So how much can it be tweaked and still remain within the boundaries of what we need for something to be safe? So that's one question. And then my other question is this a very specialized type of work that has to be done, so there are very few bidders to begin with? The pool is very small, or it's kind of frustrating when we're in this situation and we are kind of over the barrel to get this bid get something bid correctly so that we can get this in place. But anyway, can you speak to that a little bit?
Councilmember Cummings, Madam Chair. No, it's a great question, and you're right on. It is frustrating, and there aren't a lot of bidders who do this. And I think part of the issue is everyone's so busy. The people who are freight maintenance contractors are very busy, and so sometimes you get high bids or a lack of bidders. I will say that we've done our best to reach out to the contracting community. I worked with Jody's staff to put a advertisement in a rail magazine, just to garner more interest and make sure we've done our due diligence to make sure we're getting bidders. But it is a limited group, but you still try your best to make a fair, competitive process. Regarding your second question about how different can we format this, I think there's a lot of ways to procure something, to make a. We're trying when we go back out to bid, we're going to do enough to make it a different. I don't want to give too much away, to provide too much information to the contracting community ahead of time. But I think we'll do our best to make it friendly enough, or even friendlier, to the contracting community. So it's an easier way to get what we need. I don't think we'll do anything so different that it's foreign to the contracting community. But we feel like we've got a path forward to make it look a little different, to package the work into separate entities so that they know this is this is that. Where before it was formatted differently. It's a little hard to describe our process without getting into great detail. But I think we've got a path forward, Councilmember Cummings, to make it friendlier, and hopefully this time around have a successful procurement process. That's a hope. Go ahead. Yeah.
Councilman Cummings.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Nat. That's helpful to know. I'm wondering, can you talk a little bit about the time frame? You said that the contract is set to expire, and so what are the time parameters here? So
this contract it entails routine maintenance and any repairs that will ensue from that maintenance. So we've got regular brush cutting, some weed spraying, and then the fund. We think the fund's enough to get us through the end of the year to give us time to go out and get someone. So I feel confident that we can't dilly-dally, but we have enough time, but we think, to go out and in a timely manner get someone by the end of the year to piggyback our existing contract. So
thank you, that's helpful.
Yep.
All right, any additional questions or comments from council members? All right, just to refresh, the proposed action is that the Metropolitan Council authorize its regional administrator to reject all bids for contract 21P143A for master contract 2 for Bass Lake Spur Freight Rail Maintenance and Repair, and resolicit bids for this contract. So that's for business item 2022-87. So I'd entertain a motion to approve the business item.
So moved by Gonzalez.
Moved by Gonzalez. Is there a second?
Second by Chambliss.
Seconded by Chambliss. Is there any other discussion? All right, seeing and hearing none. Jenna, could you call the roll, please?
Chambliss,
Aye.
Cummings,
Aye.
Fredson,
Aye.
Gonzalez,
Aye.
Pacheco,
Aye.
Sterner,
Aye.
Zirin,
Aye.
and Barber.
Aye. With that, the motion is approved. Thank you very much, Nat and Jody. I appreciate it. Next, we're on to business item 2022-88, which is Hiawatha Light Rail Truing Machine Replacements. And we have Jay Wesley here to present.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair Barber and council members. I'm Jay Wesley. I'm a project manager in the Light Rail Vehicle Maintenance Department. Next slide, please. The proposed action for this item is for the council to authorize the regional administrator to negotiate and execute a contract with Niles Simmons Hagenscheidt USA Corporation, or NSH, to manufacture a replacement wheel truing machine for the Hiawatha Operations and Maintenance Facility in an amount of $2,295,493.20. Slide, please. I want to start by giving you an idea of what this machine is. Hopefully you can make this out, but the picture on the slide shows the wheel chewing machine at the St. Paul O&M. This is actually a picture taken during President Obama's visit to that facility in 2014. And you can see he's reaching to shake hands with the technician operating this machine. So the machine is situated in a pit in the shop floor with rails placed on top of it, allowing the entire light rail vehicle to drive on top of the machine for it to do its work. The machine essentially removes material from the surface of the metal tires to restore them to the proper shape for rail contact and minimize noise. We do reprofiling on our tires every 50,000 miles or on an as-needed basis, and that would be in flat spots or other issues. The next slide. Thank you. I do have a short clip here that just kind of goes into more detail of how the machine operating. I don't know, Greg, if you're operating this, if you can play the video. But what you'll see is the wheel on this truck will be slowly kind of turning as the machine removes some of the surface metal from the tire at the bottom. It does this work on both the left and right wheels at the same time as it operates. And when the machine finishes cutting the tires, it then rechecks them to ensure the correct profile has been achieved.
Are you able to? Okay.
Oh, it doesn't need audio, but I think you can probably guess at what it's going to show. So if you look at the wheel, it shows a little bit of the corroded portion of the wheel face, and as it's cutting, it's revealing bright metal underneath. Just to kind of give everyone an idea of what the machine is actually doing. Thank you for that. Next slide, please. So the current wheel truing machine at the Hiawatha facility was acquired in 2003 and was in pre-owned status at the time and refurbished in order to support the Blue Line fleet of 24 vehicles at the time of opening. Although it is still able to reprofile tires at this point, some components are no longer able to be updated or modified due to the age and parts availability machine. So, and in addition to that, the asset was fully depreciated in 2019. Also, the fleet serviced out of this particular shop has grown by nearly 3 times in size since the Blue Line opened, and the proposed new machine is capable of about double the output capacity of the machine. So due to this replacement need, we are requesting that the council authorizes the regional administrator to negotiate and execute a contract with NSH USA Corp to manufacture a replacement wheel truing machine for the Hiawatha Operations and Maintenance Facility in the amount of $2,295,493. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions the committee might have regarding this business item.
Thank you. Are there questions or comments? Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It sounds like this machine still works. It just doesn't work for us. Is there any kind of secondary market for something like this, or something creative and recyclable that we could do with the existing equipment?
We are exploring options to see if that is a possibility. As it is quite advanced in age, it doesn't seem to be as much interest in that, but we will continue pursuing that.
Thank you.
Councilmember Gonzalez.
Hi, thank you. And just a question about lifespan of the equipment. So we'll be getting this newer machine to service the vehicles. I'm wondering if the vehicles are considerably older than the machine. I mean, are we going to end up replacing the vehicles and then the machine is not going to work on the newer ones? Or can you tell me a little bit more about how that compatibility is going to work in the near future?
Thank you for your question, Chair Barber and Councilmember Gonzalez. So these machines have an asset life when new of about 30 years. We have a goal to use our light rail vehicles for a life of about 40 years. So we will have certainly some of our current fleet will be in operation at the end of life of the new machine that we're looking to purchase. Answers your question.
Okay. All right. Any additional questions or comments? All right. Seeing and hearing none, I'd entertain a motion to approve business item 2022-88.
Mr. President, move approval.
It's moved by Fredson. Is there a second?
Second by Chambliss.
Seconded by Chambliss. Is there any other discussion? Seeing and hearing none, Jenna, could you call the roll, please?
Chambliss. Chambliss. Cummings.
Aye.
Fredson.
Aye.
Gonzalez.
Aye.
Pacheco.
Aye.
Sterner.
Aye.
Zirin.
Aye.
And Barber.
Aye. With that, the motion carries. Thank you very much, Jay. So that is the end of our business for the evening. I think it would be my recommendation to send the two items on the ABRT lines, the D line and B line, non-consent to the full council. I think they might appreciate the update, and the rest of remainder of the items could go consent unless there's an objection. Very good. Now we're on to our information item for the evening. It's the Metro Transit Service Equity Evaluation, and we have Kristen Thompson, Joey Reed, and Cindy Herper here to present.
All right, good afternoon. Once the slides get up, we will get rolling. Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Kristen Thompson. I'm the Assistant Director of Service Development, and today I'm co-presenting with Cindy Harper, who's the Senior Manager of Route Planning, and Joey Reed, who's Principal Data Scientist in Strategic Initiatives. So this presentation will summarize our full 2021 Service Equity Evaluation Report, which will be published to Metro Transit's webpage in the very near future. This is our second annual Service Equity Evaluation. The practice was established last year as one of the General Manager's initial equity initiatives. You heard recently from our strategic plan executive sponsors about how the plan is guiding the work plan of Metro Transit staff. The Service Equity Evaluation Report is one of the deliverables and actions named in the strategic work plan most directly linked to core element 1, which reads, "We meaningfully advance equity inside our organization and throughout the region." Metro Transit's most direct way to influence the vision of core element 1 is by reviewing and adjusting the service we provide. That's why taking a careful look at how we provide service, who it can benefit, is important and a necessary step to becoming more aware of potential areas for growth and improvement. This report's findings inform our service planning and operations practices so we can both celebrate success and prioritize improvement with a common understanding of where we stand today from several perspectives, from a federal regulatory perspective and from a community perspective. Next slide, please. So broadly, the Service Equity Evaluation addresses the questions you see here. It describes how our service and ridership patterns have changed over the past year. It reviews how service changes perform from a Title VI perspective.
Not right now.
It allows us to look deeper at how different racial and ethnic groups experience our service using disaggregated data. And then finally, we'll share some of our service planning practices that promote equity. Next slide, please. In 2021, our context for service changes evolved from the 2020 report. We had signs of recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic, including the resumption of in-person school and work activities, and those changes did drive some of our service changes. Later in the year, of course, the operator shortage emerged as a major issue affecting service delivery, which led us to then reduce service in response. Next slide, please. We started the year with service levels similar to fall 2020, where we left off with the last service equity evaluation. This included Metro LRT and BRT service, as well as local routes at close to pre-COVID levels. Our commuter-oriented service remained limited, with around 50 routes still suspended. This service mix was designed to meet the needs we are seeing for essential travel. Next slide, please. On this slide, I'm going to cover some of the highlights of our service changes from the past year. Most of these came to this committee in some form or another, whether through an actual formal action for restructuring, for example, or through updates that you heard from Adam Harrington and Brian Funk earlier this year. So I will skim over these at a fairly high level. With that context, I'll say we made relatively few changes in early 2021, including school trips that were resumed in April when Minneapolis and St. Paul public schools resumed their in-person learning. We also made a frequency improvement to Route 63 that was made possible with the regional solicitation grant that had been deferred from 2020. Leading up to our August service changes, we prepared a significant slate of changes in anticipation of expanded activity at the U of M and at downtown employers. Included restoring or expanding some commuter routes, extending Route 3 to the North Loop as part of the Better Bus Routes program, and expanding the hours of 10-minute service on Blue and Green lines to include the morning rush hour. At this point in the year, after implementing the August service changes, the operator shortage became very challenging for our reliability, so we began to make plans to scale back service again for the December service changes. This included frequencies being reduced on Metro Blue, Green, and A lines and many local routes. Improvements we had made in the commuter and express network were to some extent scaled back. And of course, at the same time, we were celebrating the launch of the Orange Line and connecting bus service changes, which we did implement slightly scaled back from the originally approved plans to match our available resources. Next slide, please. So this map shows the weekday scheduled trips by stop or station at the end of 2021. So this reflects cumulatively all the changes we made throughout the year. You can see similar concentrations of service as we had at the end of 2020, focusing on the local network in core areas. And then, of course, there are a lot of trips serving suburban transit centers where many routes converge in one place. Next slide, please. This graph shows the number of weekday trips in each route classification, comparing pre-COVID service in blue to the end of 2021 in yellow. You can see that while reduced, core local service remains the backbone of our system. Suburban local and BRT service both increased during this time due to the Orange Line being implemented and some suburban service restructuring. Commuter service is still around 30% of its pre-COVID levels. Next slide, please. Switching gears a bit to talk about ridership from last year, this graph shows ridership by month in 2021 as a percentage of pre-COVID levels. So BRT is in the red line at the top, local bus in blue, LRT in green, and commuter express at the bottom in orange. You can see that ridership patterns evolved over the year, with ridership at its highest point in the fall. At that point, BRT achieved 75% or more of pre-COVID ridership, and local bus reached about 60% of pre-COVID ridership. Commuter express service did grow during that time, reaching about 15% of pre-COVID ridership. You may note a decline at the end of the year. That is a seasonal decline. As the general manager shared earlier, we are seeing ridership grow again. So you're seeing those numbers come back up. Next slide, please. And this map represents that ridership by stop or station in the fall during that high water mark for the year. You can see that ridership was concentrated along our LRT lines, key local corridors, and suburban transfer points. reflecting the ways that we've invested in service and reflecting those essential travel patterns that we're seeing. And now I'd like to hand the presentation over to Cindy Harper, and she'll review the results of the Title VI service equity analysis of all these changes that I've just described.
Great. Thank you, Kristen. Next slide, please. Okay, so now that we have an understanding of the service changes that we've made in 2021, as well as the continuing impacts of the pandemic on transit, our next task was to ensure that these service changes were made in a non-discriminatory way. The FTA requires that all agencies who receive federal funds comply with Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which protects low-income groups and communities of color. This review is known as a service equity analysis. We review how access to transit, which in this case is measured as the number of trips that serve a specific location, has changed. We're doing two different comparisons, December of 2021 against September of 2020, which is when our last service equity evaluation report left off. It also is the last time that we significantly adjusted our schedules in order to focus on essential service. The second comparison is December 2021 versus September 2019, which was pre-pandemic. The change in service availability is studied in order to see the impacts on protected groups as compared to the entire region. I will note that there is one shortfall to this methodology, which is prescribed by the FTA, and that is that it does not reflect non-home activity. The source of data that we use is the US Census, which assumes that the riders on a route match the demographics of the area through which the route travels. That's not always true, and this doesn't factor in transfers or the reality that many BIPOC and low-income customers transfer to routes that are going to destinations such as jobs and school located in areas that do not have a high population of BIPOC or low-income residents. Next slide, please. So the FTA requires that transit agencies set two major policies related to Title VI that were part of this work. The first is defining a major service change, and that determines when a service equity analysis is needed. I'll note that it doesn't matter whether you're increasing or decreasing service, whether it's a positive or a negative. Anytime it's a 25% or more change in service triggers the SEA, service equity analysis. And the other policy is setting a threshold for disparate impact and disproportionate burden. That helps us determine when differences are significant enough to result in potential for discrimination. The FTA allows each region to set their own threshold. So the Met Council has adopted what is known as the 80% rule, which means that BIPOC and low-income groups must receive at least 80% of the benefits that white or non-low-income groups are receiving. And then on the flip side, white or more affluent residents must bear at least 80% of the adverse effects that BIPOC and other low-income groups experience. Next slide, please. So these two maps show the geographic distribution of residents living near transit that are protected under Title VI. On each map, each dot represents 100 people. The map on the left reflects communities of color, and the darker circles show where we have BIPOC residents. The map on the right reflects low-income communities, and again, the darker pink or the purplish color reflects where low-income residents. These two maps are pretty similar, which means that there is some overlap between where communities of color and where low-income groups are living. Next slide, please. Our first comparison is between existing level of service and pre-pandemic level of service. The bar chart on the left shows that all demographics saw significant decreases in service serving their home area, an average of about 18.7% decrease, as shown by the black line. But the decrease in service was much steeper in areas that were predominantly white or non-low income, as compared to areas that have a lot of BIPOC or low-income residents. In white or non-low income areas, the average service change is closer to about 21% decrease, whereas for BIPOC and low income areas, it was closer to 15%. Since 21% is higher than 15%, we don't have any potential for discrimination. The map on the right shows the change in service availability from a geographic point of view. The orange and brown areas that you see are the areas that saw the biggest decrease in the amount of service, and these are primarily on express routes or in areas where alternative service is available. And the green showed an increase in trips. There's a lot less green on the map than there is orange and brown because we haven't really had the opportunity to restore or add much service. The green that you do see is located in South Minneapolis, Bloomington, and Richfield. That's due to the implementation of the orange line. And then the green that you see in parts of St. Paul is related to the restructuring of Route 63 that Kristen mentioned. Next slide, please. There is a much less of a difference when you compare the 2021 service levels to fall 2020, since that was after many of our pandemic-related service changes had been implemented. Also, 2021 was a more stable year for us than 2020, although we did face and are still experiencing a severe operator shortage challenge, which has limited our ability to both restore and add service. The bar chart on the left shows that the overall change is approximately 2.4% decrease. This is in comparison to the bar chart on the previous slide that showed about a 19% decrease in service. The relative differences are also much smaller for this comparison as compared to the previous slide. Although I will note that the decrease to service in non-low income areas is slightly lower than the decrease in service in low income areas, 2.2% decrease versus 2.3% decrease. So this is about a 0.1% difference, but it is higher on the for low income residents. This is where our 80% rule comes into play. The difference between that 2.2% decrease and 2.3% decrease is well above that 80% mark. Again, the map on the right shows the change in service availability geographically. Orange and brown areas showed the greatest losses, but there were a lot fewer brown areas on this map than there was on the previous map because we didn't make nearly the scale of reductions in 2021 that we needed to make in 2020, back when COVID first hit. And then the green, again, the green signifies an increase in service, which is due to the opening of the Metro Orange line. And at this point, I'll turn it over to Joey Reed to talk about some of our service metrics by race and ethnicity.
Thank you, Cindy. Next slide, please. We took the opportunity to dig a little deeper into both the demographics and the type of metrics we're looking at beyond what Title VI requires. So in addition to the basic metric of trip count or sort of service availability, we added in access to frequent service. So this is a sort of more of a measure of the quality of the service, how much can you use it for? And then measures of service reliability, including on-time performance, which is our standard metric for measuring bus on-time performance. And trip cuts, which is a little unusual this year. Service outcomes include access to jobs. So this is how the whole network, including the ability to transfer and travel speed, work to get you to destinations. Next slide, please. I'll start with the trip count analysis. All of the figures you're going to see from now on are going to look fairly similar to this one. Each bar represents a different race and ethnicity as measured on the US Census and the American Community Survey. And there's a horizontal line representing the regional average regardless of race and ethnicity. So one of the takeaways from this slide is that Black and Native American residents live near more service, just measured in pure trip count available, and than the regional average. That's a trend we're going to see across a number of these metrics, and it largely reflects, in some ways, the segregated housing in the region. and the way that our service sort of converges on the central business districts of Minneapolis and St. Paul. Next slide, please. This is the measure of high frequency service. You can see the same basic distribution across the different races and ethnicity groups, residents, but the differences are a bit more pronounced here with access to high frequency service. So Native American residents actually have nearly twice as much or twice as likely to have access to high frequency service as white residents within the region. Next slide, please. When we look at measures of service reliability, the first is on-time performance. So this is did the bus depart within a minute early or up to 5 minutes late of the scheduled time. We're going to show you sort of 3 different plots all in one here. We started 2019 on the left, 2020 and 2021. Doing this because we did see, if you look at the 2021 plot, the Black and Native American populations in particular see lower levels of on-time performance than white or the regional average. And so this is a bit concerning. We wanted to know if this was a consistent trend. It looks like if you track through time and look at how Black residents experience the service, the on-time performance they've experienced has gotten worse relative to the regional average in the last 3 years, while Native American residents have consistently had poorer on-time performance relative to other residents in the region. Next slide, please. We're going to talk about trip cuts now, and this is a bit unusual, as I said earlier, because we haven't historically had a lot of trip cuts. The Omicron wave combined with the pre-existing operator shortage really reduced the amount of service we could run, combined with a slightly increased amount of service in some places in the schedule. So there was just a mismatch between what we were capable of operating and what we had planned to operate. That led to a lot of trip cuts. And trip cuts are good for no one. We would like these to all be 0. Fortunately, they weren't. And in this case, the bars are going down because trip cuts are bad. So unfortunately, we're seeing the same basic pattern, but inverted, right? The Black and Native American population are experiencing more trip cuts on average than the regional average. This, as we saw earlier, both those groups of residents also experience more service overall. And so we did look at trip cuts as a proportion of the total service planned. And unfortunately, the pattern is essentially the same. So it looks like there is a disproportionate impact of trip cuts independent of service level. Next slide, please. This is a map that shows how many jobs you can reach on our transit network within sort of a reasonable travel time. So every little point on here represents a starting place, and the darker the color, the more jobs you can reach. You can see how downtown Minneapolis is the darkest color, and areas immediately surrounding downtown Minneapolis are also very dark. The most jobs in the region are located in downtown Minneapolis, so that makes sense. One of the really cool things about this map is you can see both the blue line extending southeast from downtown Minneapolis and the green line extending between downtown Minneapolis and downtown St. Paul quite clearly. You can also make out the C line, Route 5, Route 6, Route 21, the other high frequency, and the A line, of course, the other high frequency routes that really form the backbone of our system and provide access to jobs. Access to jobs, of course, isn't even probably the most important thing our network is used for, although it is important, but many other services are co-located with jobs. So access to healthcare, access to education, to libraries, to childcare follows similar patterns as access to jobs. So it's a little bit of a shortcut here. Next slide, please. If we take that map and break down by demographics, we see a similar pattern that we've been seeing. Again, The nature of our service radiating out from the central business districts, combined with the history of housing segregation, kind of determines a lot of this. But Black and Native American residents tend to have access to more jobs on average than the regional average. Next slide, please. I'll hand it back to Cindy.
Great. Thank you, Joey. So finally, I would like to highlight some of the ways that we are integrating what we have learned from these evaluations into our service planning work by highlighting some of the work done since our last service equity evaluation report. These projects really fall into two main categories. First is Title VI projects. That includes a service monitoring study, which is required by the FTA every 3 years. We did this in 2021, and it reviews the performance and design standards that we use in order to see how well we're meeting these standards in BIPOC and low-income areas as compared to the region as a whole. We also did a service equity analysis for the new Metro Orange Green Line because that was considered a major service change. So we reviewed the change in service and whether BIPOC and low-income residents and communities were really sharing equitably in those improvements. And then finally, also note that we conducted a special review this year of peer systems and how they do their service equity evaluation work and made updates to some of our methodology as a review. So a couple of examples of those changes to our methodology include increasing the threshold for poverty from 100% of the federal guidelines to 185%, and then also incorporating rider data as well as census data into our review. Some of our more routine day-to-day work include how we assign vehicles to routes. In last year's service equity evaluation report, we learned that Black riders are more likely to be on trips that were exceeding our loading standards. So we have used that data when we decided to keep our larger articulated buses on high ridership local routes, even though the pandemic loading standards have been lifted. Also, when doing our outreach and engagement work, we make sure we are hearing from those that are going to be most impacted by the project. And that includes doing some extra effort if our preliminary efforts show that, that we are lagging in terms of representation of these traditionally underrepresented groups. A specific example of this happened last summer when we were considering using a different street through the core of downtown St. Paul for some of our routes. We did a survey online because of COVID and realized that we were not hearing the demographics of the folks that were completing the survey did not represent the demographics of the riders who use those routes. And so we hit the street for some one-on-one, though socially distanced and masked engagement. And then finally, when we are considering projects that make transit faster and more reliable, we are prioritizing investing improvements on routes that serve a high percentage of BIPOC or low-income riders, because those will improve access to essential services and also to low-wage jobs. And I'll conclude with just stating in 2022, we again will focus on what we've learned from this service equity evaluation report and integrate it into our service planning work accordingly. And next slide, we'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, everyone. Great presentation. Are there questions or comments from council members? Councilmember Chambliss.
Thanks for this presentation. Thanks to the federal requirements, I think what we've just seen is a great example of how to establish a baseline and how to do measurement against a good baseline and receive some successful results. This is a very good example of how to monitor and achieve equity results. So I'm very pleased at the study and how it was put together, and wish we had support like this for many of our other projects. So good job to staff.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, Councilmember. Additional questions or comments? All right, I'm just going to echo what Councilmember Chambliss said. I think that, you know, the level of detail and taking things a step further than what we need to do, but really looking at our ridership and understanding this will really help inform us as we're, especially as we're hopefully coming out on the other side of the pandemic, as